will be your moon. You will be my sky. And I promise I will follow you until the end of the line. And I will be your flower if you will be the bee. And I promise I will always give you the sweetest parts of me. 'Cause you're the tip to my top, the key to my lock, you're my breakfast in the morning. You're my up to my down and the king of my crown. And you're everything I want. You got that sweet, sweet, sweet honey. Sugar, and I want it sweet, sweet honey. You got that sweet, sweet honey. Sugar, and I want it sweet, sweet, sweet honey. So give it to me.
That's unexpected. Why don't we start with this? Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. Your old pal Jake, and boy oh boy, let me just start by saying, there was supposed to be a stream yesterday, didn't happen. But that is because of what is ultimately good news. We did our first interview ever, and it was a delight. We interviewed the True North Eager Beaver podcast. The hosts from that, it's Paul and Doug, aka, well, I've reversed that. It's Doug and Paul, aka aka Eager Beaver and Mr. Grizzly. I gotta say, I come from a local news background, and let me just be clear about something. When you do interviews in the local news, you're dealing with folks who about 5% of what they say is worth airing to anyone. 95% of what they say is kind of pointless. It's either just a useless company line, you could have read it from a press release, or it's, they only have a partial understanding. So I will admit here and now, I was fully not prepared for an interview where 100% of it was interesting. But of course, this is True North Eager Beaver. These folks were entertaining the entire time. So I've got quite a bit of interview. I have put up our first section as the interview for today. We discussed our favorite politicians, past and present, in the U.S. and Canada. If you don't know about Canadian politics, give it a gander because it is fascinating. If you're from a different country than the United States, first of all, welcome. Delighted to have you. Second of all, you'll learn a lot because these guys know their stuff backwards and forwards, and it was just wonderful hearing what they had to say. Also in the news, a major lawsuit could reshape the internet as we know it. 2 Supreme Court cases will be heard next week. They involve Google, Twitter, Facebook, and the algorithms they use, whether or not they have liability for when people engage in stochastic terrorism on them. Boy, could that not be more relevant to our current situation? Going to be really interesting to see how that goes. And Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson was on MSNBC calling for actual consequences for the people that plotted the coup in 2020. I'm very much looking forward to how that goes. I am concerned that even with Secretary Benson adding her voice to the calls for justice, we're still going to be fighting an uphill battle. But more and more of the establishment does appear to be on our side. It's a positive development. But let's start with that. Upcoming pair of Supreme Court cases. Well, we've got a pair of interesting cases coming up next week that the U.S. Supreme Court will hear. They concern lawsuits against both Google and Twitter, each case individually. And it comes down to whether or not these companies are responsible for terrorists pushing their messages on their platforms. I have to tell you, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I don't know where I would have come down on this. Having seen the harm done by stochastic terrorism within our own country, I know where I stand now. Let's have a look at the summary. This is an article from Yahoo News. Next week, the U.S. Supreme Court is set to hear 2 major cases involving big technology companies, with key aspects of the internet on the line with its rulings later this year. Interesting the way they phrase that. First up, on February 21st, is Gonzalez v. Google. The underlying lawsuit was filed by the family of an American woman, Nohemi Gonzalez, who was killed in a 2015 ISIS attack in Paris. The family alleges that Google, which owns YouTube, is liable because its algorithms promoted extremist content to people likely to be susceptible to it. Let's pause there for a second. Lot of normal, decent folks probably won't be aware of this, but ISIS has several magazines which also exist in online form. I think Inspire is one. And yeah, they are terrorist recruiting tools. A humorous anecdote from criminal justice classes is that the vast majority of American subscribers to these magazines are the FBI because they are tracking these folks and listening to what they're saying. However, they do reach a large audience, and they do literally call for people to be terrorists. They are meant to inspire. That is what stochastic terrorism is all about, inspiring people to do despicable things. It is, if you were to translate the language they use, almost indiscernible from Fox News. If you were to print out a transcript of Tucker Carlson's speeches that he gives every night, it basically sounds like the kinds of things said by ISIS. He stops just shy of actually calling it a jihad, but it's the same thing. So you see now how some of this context, or the context in which some of these decisions may make. The context in which some of these decisions will affect the United States. I have to say, though, I think we're long overdue for proper regulation regarding stochastic terrorism online. And if it must begin with holding these companies accountable, that's fine by me. Let's continue this article. The case looks at whether Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act provides protection for an internet platform's automated recommendations. Google argues that it has immunity under the statute because ISIS, not YouTube, was the creator of the videos. Section 230 is the foundational law of modern internet. It was devised in 1996 to encourage the development of internet platforms that would facilitate speech. Anupam Chander, a Georgetown University law professor, told Yahoo News. Section 230 said the internet speakers who say harmful things are to be held responsible for what they said, but the platforms that might carry that kind of harmful speech will not be liable for that speech. The key difference, however, was, and now this is your old pal Jake inserting his beliefs, and bear in mind, I'm not a lawyer. But the key difference, I believe, here is that in 1996, when that was written, they were not dealing with complex algorithms. They were talking about relatively simplistic systems. They were talking about what was essentially telecommunications companies. It's as if to say picking up the phone and calling in a bomb threat somewhere would not mean that the phone company was liable. But now when you have algorithms entering the fray, now you have people making decisions, or rather a software program making decisions about what people will see. The owner of that software program may be liable. We will find out. In a related case, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments on February 22nd in Twitter v. Tamaneh. Relatives of Nawras Alasif, who was killed in a 2017 ISIS-related attack in Istanbul, argued that Twitter, Google, and Facebook should be held legally responsible, alleging that ISIS used the platforms to recruit members and that tech companies didn't do enough to curb their extremist users. Ooh. Sounding more and more familiar, this problem. Twitter argues that the lower court ruling created a statute of impossible breadth, saying that businesses like banks and rental car, just for context, the lower courts ruled against it. Like banks and rental car companies would also be liable if a judge found that they could have done more to eradicate terrorists using those devices. Yeah. I'm fine with that. I am fine with that. Having some responsibility demanded of these billionaires, I think, is in our best interest. Bear in mind, this is a far-right political activist Supreme Court. It's what we're dealing with. The odds that they will rule against these companies are slim. But I will say that even in the event that they find that these companies can do no wrong and that it's impossible for a rich person to ever break the law, even in that case, I'm looking forward to the dissenting opinion. And I think the dissenting opinion will probably be used to shape future legislation once we have a sane Supreme Court. The case concerns Section 2, the Twitter case concerns Section 2333 of the Anti-Terrorism Act and whether websites can be held liable for violence connected to their platforms. We've got these two cases, Chander said, in an effort to understand the arguments of both sides of the cases and what sort of implications they could ultimately have on a user's internet experience. Chander broke it down to Yahoo News. I included the link to that article. It's an interesting read, but it essentially comes down to whether or not the algorithm changes, the presence of an algorithm changes the level of responsibility by these companies. Can't tell you where it's going to go. Can't even tell you what you can do about it other than watch out for it. We'll see how this goes. At a minimum, I will tell you this. Getting lefties in office, particularly in the presidency, that gets us judges. And if you want a justice system that is not permanently and irreparably bent in favor of billionaires and their stooges, then you need left-leaning judges. You need judges who actually have an interest in justice. So vote in the primaries, baby. And, of course, vote in the general. And go as hard left as you can to save this country. There we are. Rex Trek says good morning. Good morning, Rex Trek. Good to see people up and at 'em. If you didn't catch the intro, I do apologize for missing yesterday's stream. But the good news is, the reason was I was working on editing the interview I would like to show you right meow. It was with the True North Eager Beaver podcast. The hosts of that are Doug and Paul. They are a.k.a. Eager Beaver and Mr. Grizzly. I listen to their show just about every day because their analysis of the goings-on of the world is fantastic. Their breadth of knowledge is second to few, if not none. They're right up there with the Majority Report for me, and they have a criminally small amount of subscribers for how good their content is. I highly recommend, if you're looking for new folks to watch, check them out. Link in the description. Here they are discussing with your old pal Jake the best politicians, past and present, that the U.S. and Canada have had, as well as the unfortunately shared issues we have with law enforcement treating lefties different than everybody else, or rather, the right wingers different than everybody else. Here they are.
I just
Yep.
really, really, really wanted to get the podcast done because I'd been trying for a year to get some space and it wasn't. And so I just like asked them. So, I like your style. I like the way you comment. I like the way you talk about stuff. It's like, and you seem to have the equipment. And you're able to do it. You do a jazz show, so you put shows together, and it's like, you want in on it. He said it took him 0.7 seconds, and he said yes. And we've been a duo since, and it's been a dream collaboration. It's worked very well.
In your opinions, gentlemen, who was Canada's best politician ever?
My personal opinion, I lean heavily towards Lester B. Pearson. Yeah, Lester B. Pearson, he brought in a ton of great things. During a minority government, too. He brought in the Canada Pension Plan, employment insurance, mandatory vacation days. He has been my personal favorite, and I've always thought the most effective Prime Minister thus far, for what he got done in a very short time period. Oh, he gave us our flag, for crying out loud.
Is who I had.
Hey!
Well, but I had a B selection just in case.
Who's your B?
It's a duo, Robert Baldwin and Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine, who way back in the day basically established the principles of responsible government in Canada. Robert Baldwin actually recruited Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine to run in Toronto as a francophone, and I believe he became the first francophone to win a seat in Ontario.
Yes, and he won.
And he won.
Which was kind of a shock, because everybody was like, how is this going to, and it did. He beat the odds on that one. Nobody thought a francophone from Quebec would win in Toronto, and he did.
And their governments together established a public school system, finalized the founding of the University of Toronto, set up municipal governments. It pacified French Canadian nationalism because they saw that there was an avenue forward. It was a really big thing. So the willingness to want to, look over the language and the religion lines, and at that time, 1848, and move forward. They were ahead of their time.
I'm going to have to go with, I think, kind of a layup, Pierre Trudeau, for creating social safety nets, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Who is Canada's best politician in office?
I would lean towards Chrystia Freeland. See, we're on the same wavelength, right? I mean, you knew I was going to say that, right? You knew I was going to say that.
Yeah.
I mean, she's whip smart. She has 4 degrees. She speaks 5 languages fluently. Putin is afraid of her. That's the truth. Literally, he is afraid of her.
Oh, I like her.
Yeah, if you want to go into that, Douglas, on why he's afraid of her.
Her mother participated in the writing of the Ukrainian Constitution.
That's a fact.
For one, I believe she used to be an editor at the Financial Times as well. She speaks Ukrainian and Russian, so if Putin's bullshitting, she can talk back to him in his language. She basically ran, when she was a teenager or something, I think she went to Ukraine to help run a resistance network.
Yes.
She's always she's a mother of kids right now, at the Governor General's hall when she was having her investiture as being an MP. She actually had her children there doing homework while they were waiting for the ceremony. She gets stuff done.
She probably is my actual pick, but for the sake of diversity in our responses here, I'm going to go with Jagmeet Singh, or popularizing NDP.
Yeah, no, the thing is, we both like Jagmeet a lot, and when he behaves like a statesman, when he's on, he's on. But he's been playing sort of the con game, if you will, the conservative game lately, where he'll just turn around and blame Justin Trudeau for stuff that is not federal responsibility. They're provincial responsibilities, so it would be at the state level.
And he comes from provincial politics, so he should know better.
He knows better. But it's why are you gaslighting, dude? You're supposed to be above that. So we get upset with him for that. And we call him out. But when he does his statesman-like things, he's solid, man.
On average, how often has he done this, and when did he start doing this more? Conservative type politics.
He's doing it a lot less lately, yeah. And especially in the last year.
Yeah. In the last election campaign, he was we were basically saying he was campaigning pretty much like a jilted lover.
Mm-hmm.
Justin Trudeau says he's going to do all these things, but he never writes, he never calls, he never delivers. He'll stand you up. You can't trust him to do anything. It was
yeah, we don't care for that type of politics. It's if you're a political leader, you lead a political party. Tell me what you're going to do. I know what that guy did. You don't need to point out what he didn't do or what his mistake. Tell me what you're going to do for us as Canadians.
Yeah,
I know what he
case
did.
for you. Yeah, because you're at the end of the day, you don't have a vote against somebody. You only have votes for somebody.
Correct.
And we're comparing everyone to each other, the alternatives, not the almighty.
Yeah.
100%. USA's best politician ever.
Ooh, that's I would say, okay, I don't know if I cared for him as a person. He had an abrasive personality, but I thought he was an effective leader, and he got a tremendous amount done by stepping into the position in 1963, Lyndon Johnson.
Interesting.
He got a lot done. Like, he got a ton done. And racial equality, he was pushing for a Medicaid, Medicare, like a healthcare universal program of some type. I can't remember all the details, but what I've read about the man, he might have been an abrasive monster, for want of a better term. He was an abrasive big dick Texan. and the stories about him, right? He used to buy pants of a specific way so when he stood up, it could swing in your face because he had a giant hog. Good on you, brother. I get it. But
speak softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah, he intimidated people by doing that. And he was, like I said, very abrasive, but he was a very effective politician. And he did a lot of good.
If he were to have accomplished all the things he nearly accomplished, I think he would win hands down.
Agreed.
On my show, I rant constantly about the Chenault affair, which the end I rant about is Richard Nixon's involvement, where he essentially sabotaged Vietnam peace talks, we think.
Yes.
But, oh my gosh, if Johnson would have been able to put a bow on that and that conflict, that alone, my word.
Exactly. And I mean, what the man did in a short time period, taking over a position after, an assassination.
Yeah.
Like... He was, I would not say that the man was universally loved, right? And with Kennedy, you loved him or you hated him. Right. Obviously, somebody hated him because, but the people who loved Kennedy adored him. I don't think any of the people that loved and adored Kennedy felt the same way about Johnson.
No, definitely. I wholeheartedly agree.
But I mean, you have to, from a historical look back on things, it's like, he accomplished a hell of a lot.
The easy go-to is Washington himself, because they asked him to stay and he relinquished power, particularly in that era. So,
absolutely.
But without going for the obvious, I'm going to go for FDR.
My friend, we are on the same page. That's my pick too.
That'd be my second.
Yeah. Why FDR for you?
He was transformational, and particularly at a good time. I mean, one of the main mistakes of the First World War was, saddling Germany with absolutely everything. Yeah. Right. So, the whole New Deal thing and making sure that, we didn't repeat the same mistake. And then you got the highways and the start of the national park system, which probably paved the way for the EPA with Nixon. And, he did a lot.
And I'll tack on a little there just to fill it out and also put a bow on it. He did this with the New Deal, up to 1939. Basically fix the country just in time to tag in on the most important war that was not within our own borders that at least this country ever fought. Yeah, I gotta say FDR, although similar to you, Mr. Grizzly, I don't think I would have liked hanging out with the guy from what I know.
No, he was not a nice guy.
No.
And a bit of a raging racist too, is the rumor.
Yeah.
He refused to shake Jackie Owen's hand.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, just like his personality would not clue you into what his politics ended up being.
No, not at all. Like, not at all. Well, you got to remember who wrote the New Deal. Who was the economist? Do you remember who wrote it?
No.
John Kenneth Galbraith, Canadian.
Son of a gun. I'm embarrassed. All right.
Yeah, that's okay. But I don't expect many people to know that. I learned it in high school in economics class. J.K. Galbraith. Brilliant economist, and he helped write the New Deal and come up with the basically modern America in many respects.
I feel like when I look back at I did do a look back at Canadian political history, and I do find like it's not a modern phenomenon that we're so intertwined. I would have thought there
No.
would have been more hard feelings in the 1800s, but no, we're constantly like, hey, Canada, please write the New Deal for us.
Yep. And every now and then we say we're out, right? The whole
Yeah,
Iraq
yeah,
thing was like,
yeah.
no, you guys are on your own on that one.
I have
Call us when you're done.
Does having the U.S. as a neighbor feel like having an alcoholic as a neighbor? Like, oh, this is a bad day for them.
Well,
sometimes we joke we live above the meth lab.
yeah. We do joke about that, but a lot of us used to be quite smug about it.
Lovingly.
We used to be smug about it, but I think the smugness has gone away in the last number of years because we're not immune to it. We have the same issues here. I mean, the city that I live in, the nation's capital, Ottawa, Canada, we were overtaken by a horde of ignorance last year, of uninformed, ignorant hatred that wanted to overthrow the government because they didn't like having to, do the bare minimum, wear a mask, get a vaccine.
Yeah, that is a phenomenon that blew my mind, and it broke my heart to see it happening in Canada with the trucker protest.
And it happened in a very typically Canadian way. And that, like,
well, how so?
Well,
nobody was shot, nobody got killed, nobody got hurt.
Shot, no one got killed. There was like, when it was dismantled extremely peacefully, but also like the other way around. It's like, we're having our liberties taken away, but you've driven all the way from British Columbia through the Rockies, through the prairies, through the
5 days to get here.
Down here, we're able to bring your trucks for some unforsaken, God knows why reason, right to the foot of Parliament Hill. And then you were able to stay for 3 weeks, going on 4, before somebody really did something like this. And really, you're going to call it yourself? May I please buy you a one-way ticket to Iran, Afghanistan, Syria? I mean,
there's
if you
a country.
This is oppression. This is tyranny. Really? Yeah, you're like, okay.
You gentlemen are going to love North Korea.
Oh yeah.
It's lovely this time of year.
It's lovely this time of year.
So we kind of sort of like fell into an occupation by accident because for some reason the local police department decided that for some reason that it would be a violation of somebody's human rights to not allow a 18-wheeler to protest. Right. And it's like, we can't close that. And it's like, we close it every day for Remembrance Day in Canada Day, every single year of my life.
All the time.
Like today we can't. What the heck? So, I mean, it was just, we just sort of like, it was almost like everybody was Dudley Do-Right and like blindly tripping over themselves. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God. And they literally, even though there was chatter all over the place, and they still maintain this to this day. They still maintain this to this day because we had a public order emergency commission to look into it, right? Like just to determine whether or not the invocation of the Emergencies Act was justified, and if it was, what we can do better next time to make sure things go more smoothly. And they are still convinced with everything that they heard. They were coming. They were saying that they weren't going to leave and all this stuff. We had no indication whatsoever that they would leave.
They were told by the RCMP. They were told by CBSA. They were well informed. We didn't know anything about it.
Do you think the fact that it was a right-winger organized protest had some involvement in the police reaction?
Very much so.
Yep.
Very much so.
All you have to look at is an indigenous protest in a forest where they're going to clear cut some trees, or like, and
we have that happening in Atlanta right now.
Weekly, those are broken up.
Yeah.
They took 100,000 people in the downtown core hostage for 3 full weeks, going on 4 with nothing in sight. And because it's right smack in the middle of the city, anybody that had to travel east to west or west to east was also blocked off. And while that was going on, there were movements at borders to seal them up completely so nothing could get through. It was basically, they wanted to starve us.
That's what they set out to do it. That's exactly what they set out to do.
It was called Operation Bear Hug.
Yeah.
They literally wanted to like put a noose completely around us and just choke us off until we said uncle, I guess. And their objective was to get the government to be removed and then replace them with people they would name.
They chose. They're about freedom and democracy when they choose the government for you and you don't get a voice.
That was the True North, the hosts of the True North Eager Beaver podcast. I definitely recommend you check them out. Fantastic show. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Real Bill P, great to see you, sir, says, as a Virginian, I disagree with the Washington assessment. Washington was the ultimate racist. The man owned slaves. So much for all men are created equal. Definitely agree. Definitely agree. And I happen to know Canada's going through a similar re-examining of their own founding fathers. Because just like with ours, much of Canadian history is built upon taking over of indigenous people's lands. So they are having a similar revelation now. That said, I do agree with his point that regardless of the man's motivations, Washington's choice not to pursue term after term after term was a big part of what made America's leadership distinct from the royalty that preceded it in more than just name. But fair point. I mean, the man, by modern standards, hell, by any standards, by standards of the day, frankly, was not what I would call an upstanding, moral human being. That said, definitely recommend True North Eager Beaver podcast. Well, Jocelyn Benson, Secretary of State from Michigan, recently appeared on MSNBC, and the message she had is dead on. And that is that it's time to start actually pursuing the people that attempted a coup in the United States. Your old pal Jake's a little fired up about this one. Let's have a listen. Michigan's Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson was recently on MSNBC, and she, as well as every other guest, I believe Neil Katyal as well, just knocked it out of the park with a message I really hope that centrist America hears, which is that we don't have eternity to press charges on the people that attempted to steal the election of 2020. Because 2024 is coming up, 2022 came and went, and some of them are in office now. And with 2024 coming up, frankly, it's not only dangerous, it is an embarrassment that this is still an unresolved issue. It must be resolved immediately. Here is Jocelyn Benson on MSNBC.
And Mr. Secretary, why didn't you just quit and walk away?
Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution. And I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots when you're doing your job. And that's all we did. We just followed the law and we followed the Constitution. And at the end of the day, President Trump came up short.
That was Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, on why he resisted the intense pressure we've been talking about that he felt and that was applied by the ex-president and his allies to manufacture evidence of.
For the record, of course I want him to rant and rave and make a bigger deal, but that was as straightforward as an answer as I could have realistically hoped for from him during that interview.
Election fraud, of which, of course, there was never any. Raffensperger was one of many state-level officials, most of them Republicans, many of them Republicans, in Georgia and across the battleground states who faced the wrath of Donald Trump and his allies as they sought to overturn the election through the courts, through state legislatures, and when all else failed, through the violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Joining us now, someone who was on the receiving end of smears and attacks, Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Neil and Katty are still here. Madam Secretary, I want to show something that you said about what this was like for you, because we're focusing on Raffensperger, but from the Trump side, this was a national effort.
Even the president himself had called on me to be arrested and tried for treason.
That is some, when I say that's some third world country stuff, Let me specifically say that sounds just like the countries that the United States got coups started in. That is exactly the kind of language we hear from the countries that have been wrecked by U.S. interference. The irony that we are now dealing with it is not lost on lefties.
Potentially executed.
To hear that the President of the United States, when he loses the election in Michigan, decides that the way to deal with that is to accuse you of treason, to ask, isn't there some way to arrest her?
We should stop expecting that there is a bottom to the lengths that people will go to overturn legitimate election results and seize power in our country.
So, Madam Secretary, I seized on that for a couple of reasons. One, you endured a particularly brutal pressure campaign and threats outside your home and to your young family. But it also was directed by Trump. And I'm not ever clear on why he wasn't investigated aggressively after all this became known. He was tweeting his attacks against you, accusing you of treason for not overturning the results in Michigan. He was caught on tape threatening Raffensperger if he didn't find 11,740 or whatever it was votes in Georgia. What do you make of the fact?
Man, I can't help but tap in. I mean, granted, we haven't even heard from Benson yet, but the SOB was on tape. It's insane. It's absolutely insane that he wasn't arrested that day. If it was anybody else, let me try this again. If it was anybody who wasn't ridiculously powerful and they did a crime of that magnitude, you better believe they'd be arrested like that. And it shows you what a mockery of justice the United States Department of Justice truly is. That it's 2020 goddamn 3, and this guy's still walking around a free man. Pathetic.
Fact that we're back at the sort of eve of another prosecutor who looked into the conduct, and we don't know whether it'll go all the way up to Trump.
Well, look, I think the truth is the truth and the facts are the facts. And what you're seeing now is the more people look, as this grand jury has, at actually the truth and the evidence, they'll find first and foremost that the election was fair, legitimate, and the results an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And now moving forward, we need consequences for everyone. I mean, yes, there was one former president involved, but there were a lot of people involved in this effort that aided and abetted the cause. And so what I'm looking for are consequences up and down, from people who have lied in court, to people whose lies and misrepresentations of what happened in 2020 have led to real threats and consequences in our lives, as your last segment detailed, for election workers all around the country. We need to ensure there are consequences at the state and federal and local level for these challenges and attempts to overturn democracy, and know that if there are not, it will not end. And as we look into the barrel of a 2024 election cycle, now is the time where those consequences must be pursued. The law is clear, the Constitution is clear, as my colleague in Georgia said, and now we need to see the law enforced and consequences realized, or else we're going to keep facing these challenges again and again, and people are going to get hurt.
I could not have asked my Secretary of State to say it better. Preach it, sister, yes. Now, you know what? 2 years ago was the time. 2 years ago was the time. But having failed that and every day between then and now, then yes, now is the time. We cannot wait any longer. There's a link in the description. Contact the Department of Justice. Just point them to this. My God. Yeah, our democracy is in danger, and it is being endangered currently by the Department of Justice. They are so weak. They are so much in a peon of American oligarchs that they cannot figure out what to do about this situation, because it's like a kid who has walked up to the high dive, and there's a bunch of kids on the ladder below him, and that kid on the top of the high dive has made one decision, only one, which is they are not going to jump off. They told all their friends, I'm going to go do a giant cannonball. And now they're not up there debating cannonballs. They're not up there saying, maybe I'll just do a pencil dive and make sure I hit feet first instead of rump first. Nope. They've just decided they don't want to jump. That's the American Department of Justice. And they're trying to figure out how they can just discreetly walk back down that ladder. Unfortunately for them, there's a whole bunch of kids on the ladder waiting to go. That's a confused analogy. The point is, look, the point is they don't want to do the one thing that it is clear that they must do, that there is no other choice. If they are going to hold a badge and say they are law enforcement, then it is required that they enforce the law. We see an obvious breaking of the law, and we have a bunch of career Department of Justice officials whose careers have been built in a system wherein the golden rule is don't go after the rich, that are now faced with this conundrum. And they just can't figure out. They're sitting around, they're twiddling their thumbs. They're like, well, maybe if we give it another year, then people will forget about it. Maybe if we maybe if we really go after the Jan 6 rioters and make a huge deal about that, maybe if we can get one of them thrown in prison for 20 years, maybe then people will say, okay, they're doing their... No, we know who did it. We barely require a trial because most of the evidence was public. It was done in front of cameras. We just need a judge to go, yep, okay, now I've officially watched that clip of the president saying, let's do a coup. Guilty. It's not a terribly difficult case. They're acting like they need to build this super intense. If you can't get the behind-the-scenes effery, then get the effery that was just done out in person, out in public. It's real easy. In fact, it is what Glenn Kushner would call a press play case, as in you have the tape, you press play, you say, that's my case. The fact that they have not put one of these people in a courtroom with charges against them is despicable. And it's also dangerous. And we should not put up with it. I'll let Secretary Benson keep going.
Madam Secretary, what is the consequence of the Republicans' ability to memory hole the fact that the very same election they agree with Trump was rigged and stolen from him was the very same ballot that sent them back to Congress?
Now I can take that one. They're liars. They're liars. That's why they did that.
Yeah, it's quite an irony, and really speaks to the reality of these falsehoods, that they're actually, even if you just unpack a little bit of them, as you just did, they really don't hold up. You can't challenge an entire election for allegedly being somehow wrong or having problems, but only really have problems with one particular candidate in the ballot. So it varies, no matter how you look at it. There's no legitimacy to the arguments that the 2020 election results from members of Congress to the Senate to the presidency were anything other than an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And it's time for people to start acknowledging that, and it's time for the courts to start holding accountable those who have not only not acknowledged that, but have not acknowledged it to dire consequences for the people of our elections.
Let me just make it clear. Because the funny thing is, the farther left you go, the more sympathy, not agreement, but sympathy, you can get for the MAGA types, because they are not complicated. First of all, they don't know how any of this works. That is why they are MAGA, because evil politicians have preyed upon their ignorance. They're working hard to keep them ignorant as well. I give you Ron DeSantis. I give you book burnings. They know that ignorance is key. The Republicans know that ignorance is key to their electoral strategy. So the MAGA types have no idea how any of this works. They use a childlike system for determining right and wrong, which is to see if somebody gets in trouble for it. Of course they think they don't believe anything the left says, because to their untrained ears, it sounds exactly like the rhetoric their own side is saying. And every time they see their side lying, they think, well, imagine how much the left must be lying. Because the consequences for both are the same. There are no consequences for the lies the right tells. There must be. They have to see mother effers going to prison. Do you remember those wonderful, hopeful days following January 6th? Yeah, sad. Yeah, depressing. But what did it look like for just a minute? Do you remember? Because the GOP was real quiet. MAGA got real quiet all of a sudden. QAnon got real quiet. Or rather, Q followers got quiet. They thought someone was going to prison for sure. And then nothing happened. Nothing happened. And so people that don't follow these things, people that do follow them but don't understand them because they've been taught poorly and intentionally poorly, they saw that nobody went to prison. Now they say that the J6 rioters are political prisoners and are being used like pawns. They're partially right. Yeah, those people deserve to be in prison, but they're absolutely being used as scapegoats. It was clearly Merrick Garland's hope that we would go, yay, yay! He got a couple hundred people that are poor. Or not poor, let's be honest, they're small business owners. But he got a couple hundred people that are not filthy rich. That's what he wanted desperately for us to do. He was hoping we would continue being the dumb, passive cows we have always been. But those days are gone. At least the left has gotten media literate. At least the left has wisened up over the last, 8 years? Good. But that's a huge problem for Garland, because now he can't get away with giving a massive pass on things like this. Can you imagine what the investigations into Donald Trump would look like if there were no media coverage, if there wasn't the online jumping with both feet on this stuff? I'll tell you what, I remember what people said about Mike Pence when he was giving his J6 testimony. Or rather, excuse me, when the testimony about him was given in the January 6th committee. There was a couple of days in the national news where this guy was talked about like he was some kind of a hero. You could just see them building up Pence as a hero. Online lefties weren't having it. They tore into him like a bag of Lay's and said this guy was just too scared to go along with the evil. Shortly thereafter, you had the reactions change from talking heads, and then you got reactions like what's coming up.
One of the things we know that Fani Willis scrutinized was the fake electors plot. They sought to carry that out in Michigan as well. We don't talk about that as much because it's pretty opaque to us in terms of where the investigations into those individuals and then the plot as a national effort stand. But just remind us what that looked like in Michigan.
Yeah, I think it's important to see that there were, people lined up to serve as what we call fake electors, to then be presented to Congress to be accepted as the representatives of the electoral vote of those states that actually don't represent the electoral vote or the vote that happened in Michigan and in many other states. But it was the action, it was sort of the tail end of a multifaceted effort.
Just to be clear, that's fraud. That right there. The fake electors, like what we call fake electors. That's like saying what we call bank robbers. Anybody who did that committed a crime, plain and simple.
To overturn the election
Why aren't
results,
they in
particularly in
prison right
battleground states that the former president lost. And so it began with blocking the certification of our elections at the local or state level. Those attempts were then intended to lead for the ability of a false slate of electors to be presented or adopted by state legislators and then presented to Congress and potentially accepted into the record by then Vice President Mike Pence. So it was a clear strategy that, frankly, we saw as it unfolded and we knew was the plan. And that's why, for us at the local level, ensuring that our elections were certified first and foremost, then ensuring that our state legislature certified or protected or didn't overturn those election results, then ensuring that the actual slate of electors made its way to Washington. All of that was our effort to defend against these nefarious efforts at every step of the way to enable Congress to potentially overturn a presidential election, which would, again, the end result that the false slate of electors were trying to enable.
Yeah, I'm doing the yelling that Jocelyn Benson can't do on national television, apparently. All of what she just described, that was a chain of a crime. And it began actually with Trump sowing the seeds of doubt in the election before the election even began. I actually, January 6th testimony, he was told the election wasn't likely to go well for him. So well before, he didn't have confidence in himself winning. Well before the election even ran, he was sowing doubt in it. Then this punk, after the election, tried to send fake electors to 7 states. Fortunately, none of them successfully confused the process. But the purpose of them was to confuse the process, at a minimum, to confuse the process, to send the whole thing to the Supreme Court, which he had packed with his own appointees. That was the point. To take the election away from you, in other words, to nullify your vote. That's what this guy was trying to do. I don't feel that we need to wait for Trump to have the handcuffs put on him to charge the rest of these punks. I am glad that the Michigan Attorney General got off her butt and is going after him. Got sick of waiting for Merrick Garland. I'm going to give you a little spoiler about what you can do. We got 5 states where this happened, where nothing has happened, nothing is happening. There is no work being done on it. Get after your Attorney General if you're from one of those 5 states. I'll show you the states in a moment.
So, Neil,
And here's Neil Katyal telling you the truth about Pence, as alluded to earlier.
Scheme couldn't exist without Pence doing what Trump told us at speeches in Georgia ahead of the special election there, what he told us on Twitter, and what we know through testimony. He described even more colorfully with one of his favorite swear words on the phone with Mike Pence. Trump sits atop the fake elector plot because he was the one screaming from the rooftops at people to do it. He was calling people at the state level. I think it was the peak of COVID. He was inviting them to the White House, if I remember some of the contemporaneous reporting. I know Jack Smith is humming along now, but do you think we'll ever understand the delay in examining Trump's role as the architect of the fake electors plot?
If you mean the delay by the Justice Department, no, I think it's incomprehensible to me that it's taken so long. I know we'll talk about this soon, but like subpoenaing Mark Meadows, it's taken, more than 2 years for the Justice Department to do that. And I understand there's a congressional investigation going on and the like, and you don't want wires to be crossed, but we've lost a lot of valuable time on something that's so central to our democracy.
I just want to be clear. This is playing on national cable television. If you all are watching my show, you are already the type of folks that get educated, and I appreciate you. But frankly, the vast majority of the nation doesn't pay very close attention to this kind of stuff, and they only get their news from corporate media. So to hear corporate media like this just coming out and saying it has been too long. That is wonderful. That is very good. And I would advise you to keep track of the links in this description so that you can provide them to some of your friends that only watch corporate media, such as this, and have questions about what they can do. What can they do? Oh boy. Contact the DOJ and tell them they're angry citizens and they don't feel that they are protected by their Department of Justice.
And, thank heavens for people like the secretary who, bravely stood up and did the right thing. And the Secretary of State in Georgia, Raffensperger, as you said, did the right thing when it really mattered. It's one of the interesting things about Trump world is that, people would just laugh off Trump. You'd be like, oh, yeah, he's denigrating Muslims or he's, blowing up climate or something like that. But nobody ever felt responsible to stop that. And when it came time for Raffensperger to make the call, he made the right call. When it came time for, amazing to me, Mike Pence to make the right call on January 6th, thanks to the advice of Judge Michael Ludig, Pence did the right thing.
Listen to how he talks about Pence, and remember that in the initial reaction to the January 6th testimony about Pence, people on these kinds of channels were singing his praises, like, what a hero.
Once in his life, he was that broken clock that was actually right, and he stood up and did the right thing. Otherwise, democracy would have gone entirely off the rails. And that, to me, is kind of why the Justice Department should have been investigating this full throttle from the first minute that this happened, while this was still the Trump administration back January 6th and 7th, because, this is... it can't just be that because of a couple of brave individuals.
He's moving on to a different point. I just want to say what he said about Pence initially, or at least as I understood it, was this guy ain't no hero, but he did do the right thing on that day. But the clarification that, look, he stood by for a lot of this crap. He just wasn't willing to do a coup.
Crisis was averted. We can't have this happen again and rely on the officials to all do the right thing, and so the prosecution and the, getting to the bottom of what happened is so incredibly important.
Yeah, man. It can't be stressed enough how important it is that we get this done already. It is deeply concerning that we still have John Eastman walking around free. We still have Rudy Giuliani, a free man. We still have Donald Trump, a free man. Gulag, gulag, gulag. It's time. It is time. The waiting is dangerous. The delay is dangerous. Every single person in charge of putting this punk in prison is deferring their responsibility. They're hoping somebody else does it first. The buck has to stop somewhere. It would appear that we must insist. This right here is where the fake elector plots happened. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Oh, and by the way, Washington, D.C. Georgia has an investigation into Trump right now, into election tampering. Michigan, God bless Dana Nessel, has an investigation. Where are you, New Mexico? Democrat Attorney General. Where are you, Nevada? Pennsylvania. Where's your state investigation? As Michigan demonstrates, there is nothing stopping a state investigation from running concurrently with a federal investigation. Nothing but tradition. All of those attorney generals will try to say that they don't want to interfere with a federal investigation. What federal investigation? What investigation? I don't see it. No law prohibits them from opening a state-level investigation. If it should be that everybody they were looking at happens to get caught by the federal investigation, they can close their state investigation. They can say, we have nothing further to add. But you know what would be more likely? What would be more likely is these state-level attorney generals are more familiar with the state-level crimes and therefore catch the state-level perpetrators. The people in your state's Republican Party that participated in this. Do you think Merrick Garland's going to get all of them in every state? Hell no. He hasn't been able to get one guy. The guy. He hasn't been able to get him yet. He's not going to get everyone who tried to take your vote. Use your power. Use the fact that you are their constituents. Contact your attorney general. Link to the individual attorney general's contact page is in the description. Contact them. Say, if you're in one of these states, say, I am your constituent and I demand a state investigation into who tried to nullify my vote. It has been, sir or ma'am, 3 years, or at least we are going into year 3. It's too long. 1 year should not have passed. We are now in 2023. This crime happened in November of 2020. Demand that that a state-level investigation be opened. If you are not from one of those states, if you are from one of those states, my God, write your attorney general. If you are not from one of those states, write the attorney general, Merrick Garland. Link also in the description. Tell him you are waiting and not patiently. The idea that we should put any faith into these people is naive to the point of being dangerous. Oof. Get fired up. Well, let's read some comments before we head out. Scott Ward with the super chat for $5. Thank you so much. Here you go, brother. Good luck with the channel. Man, I appreciate it. We got a lot of folks. Excellent. And Scott, thank you again. I genuinely appreciate the super chat. Trying to build this bad boy. Hey, Jake, the Benson name is awesome in American politics. Senator Lloyd Benson was an awesome statesman and lawmaker. Look him up. Oh, I absolutely will. In fact, that interview with Eager Beaver made me want to start doing some political history videos. I'm definitely I'll have a gander at Senator Benson. Senator Whitehouse Rex Trek says is amazing. Yeah, the wasn't he? I think he was the Rhode Island Attorney General. Am I recalling that correctly? He had an earlier career in law enforcement, prosecution. And yeah, he's a real interesting fellow. Miles Austin says, we need to be the adult that goes up the high dive and pushes them into the water. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Let me scroll down just a bit. Wireless Mike says, I love the poorly educated, a quote from Donald Trump. Yep. Yeah, he doesn't even know how to lie subtly, or he doesn't know how to play that subtle political game. He I'm sure at one point was told more or less in basic terms, we need these people dumb, and just went out and was like, be dumb. Real Bill P says, Pence is ridiculous. He did the right thing once. Now he wants to control the ship. Hell to the no. Couldn't agree more, Real Bill P. Yeah. Wireless Mike says, 1 year was too long. None of those responsible should run as much as a snow cone tent. Yeah. They are the absolute worst America has to offer these days. They are horrible human beings. They are criminals, and they deserve prison, or no one deserves prison. If a coup doesn't get you prison time in the United States, why the hell do we even have law enforcement? What is the point? Maddening. Well, folks, if you want to know what you can do about all this, the links are, of course, in the description. And again, I stress, if you want perhaps something a little more chill than your old pal Jake, but equally informative, the True North Eager Beaver podcast, friends of the show, I definitely recommend checking them out. The link is also in the description. We're going to have more interviews with them airing over the next couple of weeks, because just about everything they talked about was gold. Loved it. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, this has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. I've been your old pal Jake. I'll see you next time.
Yeah, do you even love me anymore? Are you in or are you out? What are you here for? They ask me if I'm finished, but I'll tell you one more. Baby, this is all I got. Give me one encore. Yeah, there's certain things that I can't accept. I blame pride. No, this ain't the type of tape you eject. It's straight fire. No, this ain't the same facing regret. At the same time, it's like think back to the day that we met. I mean, I hate to admit crime, hate to admit lie, hate to admit buying the fact that the flames die. Made up my damn mind to fix it, I've been trying. 1 minute we're all fine until we go offline. Yeah, fuck it up, baby.